David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the show. I am back from my emergency appendectomy, which I will talk about more a little bit later. But let's get into the news. If you somehow believed that the Ukraine whistleblower is just a total liar or a plant, someone that can't be trusted, even though Donald Trump has already confirmed a whole bunch of what the whistleblower said, there's now a second whistleblower that is in the process of coming forward. In a world where Donald Trump wants us to think everything is fine, we have yet another set of blockbuster allegations potentially coming forward from another whistleblower related to Ukraine. And understand that the second whistleblower is also an intelligence official and has, as far as we know right now, firsthand knowledge of the Ukraine fiasco involving Donald Trump. Now, how far we've fallen that in the past we'd say, oh, a whistleblower from inside the intel community. This is someone we should take seriously. In the Trump era, one of the most maligned areas has been the intelligence community, where the president has successfully primed his defenders not to believe anything we hear from the intelligence community. Now, there's an important point to make here before we continue. The American intelligence community has done many bad things in the past, and mostly they have been things Republicans have liked, importantly. But that's an aside right now. This is not about defending the intel community as a political apparatus. Lots of right-wingers, even some on the left, say we should hate the intel community because it's been terrible for decades. And when you allow the intelligence community some kind of elevated status to tell us who is behaving okay and who is not, you are essentially giving over political policy to spies, and that's not something we want to do. Now, there are lots of that makes sense. There are many political disagreements to be had with the intelligence community's actions in the past. CIA in Latin America, I mean, I don't even need to do the list. But this is about attacking the credibility of individuals and the work that they do, which is mostly motivated by wanting to do the right thing at the individual level, which gets us back to our story, because there may even be more than two whistleblowers at this point. Check this out. This is a tweet from Andrew Bakaj, who represents whistleblowers from the intelligence community, who said, "Intelligence community whistleblower update. I can confirm that my firm and my team represent multiple whistleblowers in connection to the underlying August 12, 2019 disclosure to the intelligence community Inspector General. No further comment at this time." Multiple whistleblowers, could be two, could be more. Now, the president immediately writing this off as the actions of the deep state. The president of the United States is no longer even pretending to be anything other than a blatant conspiracy theorist, tweeting, quote, "The first so-called secondhand information whistleblower got my phone conversation almost completely wrong." Not true, by the way. So now word is they are going to the bench, and another whistleblower is coming in from the deep state, also with secondhand info. Meet with Shifty, keep them coming. Now, Trump mentions Shifty, which is his nickname for Adam Schiff, head of the House Intelligence Committee. And this is the new attack strategy from Donald Trump. The first strategy was deny, deny, deny. That didn't work. Then the strategy became, well, say that there was nothing wrong that happened, even though you did talk about Joe Biden, and most of the material details that we got are actually accurate, even by your own admission, say everything was fine. Now it's, well, they are all left-wing Democratic deep state plants controlled by Adam Schiff and Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, who himself, by the way, should be a target of these investigations, tweeting very much on the same page, quote, "Surprise, Democrat lawyer has other secret sources. Swamp media will corruptly fail to point out it means nothing now that conversation is public. No money, no quid pro quo, unlike Biden helping son make millions from Ukrainian crook. Orchestrated Dem campaign like Kavanaugh." Listen, these people are not well. Okay. These are truly sick people. And we can do political analyses up and down every single day, but the political analyses fall short because, in a sense, a political analysis assumes that we are dealing with well people, which we are not. We are now going to get a chance to see just how blind and bamboozled Donald Trump supporters are. And here's the big story. It started with one whistleblower on Ukraine, one on the IRS, which you may not even have heard about. We now have a second one on Ukraine, all within 2 weeks. Just imagine how many pent-up potential whistleblowers there are who have seen incredible illegal things. The Trumpists are doubling down on this is a Democratic hit job. It's all fake. And we showed you the transcript. Of course, the transcript is only a portion of the call and is already terrible for them and was already reportedly a precondition of Ukraine investigating Biden and promising this deliverable. So what the Trumpists have as their strongest defense is to pretend that the transcript is exculpatory when in fact it is a damning piece of evidence. And once again, imagine what we will know in just another week. Under the Trump administration, members of the intelligence community have been endlessly smeared, but national security officials have only been somewhat smeared. And now Donald Trump's own former national security officials, along with a whole bunch of others, have completely turned on him, signing a letter saying the Ukraine whistleblower, which we now know are actually multiple as we get a second whistleblower close to coming forward, the Ukraine whistleblower did nothing wrong, and the Ukraine whistleblower deserves to be protected. And once again, we should all know this, and once again, more people fall off of being able to defend the absolutely indefensible actions of Donald Trump. This letter was signed by 90 former national security officials, and some of them literally worked for Trump, like James Nealon, Roberta Jacobson, and Andrea Kendall Taylor. It otherwise is signed by a whole bunch of Democrats and a whole bunch of Republicans. Now, there's something interesting here. There are two ways to interpret when Republicans and Democrats agree about something in politics in the United States, because Democrats and Republicans agreeing does not happen often, and it's not by default a good thing. I'll explain what I mean. Very often, when Democrats and Republicans agree on something, it's an element of our political system that reinforces the status quo. So, for example, on lots of broad issues, Republicans and Democrats are basically deferential to the way that things are. Campaign finance, for example, in terms of actually changing the laws around it. The military-industrial complex and funding of the Pentagon. There are exceptions, of course, mostly Democrats, but those are areas where you see a lot of deference from Republicans and Democrats to the status quo and defending the old guard. So sometimes when you see Democrats and Republicans agreeing, it's not actually a good sign. But this is not that. This is both Democrats and Republicans standing up to defend the speech of those who want to hold government accountable. They are standing up to protect someone who is trying to raise an alarm about what government is doing. So we have to take it very seriously. And Trump has, of course, completely panicked over this and spent the morning with unhinged tweet after tweet, including endlessly smearing the whistleblower, who, of course, has done nothing wrong. One example tweet of the incoherence and panic, Trump saying, declassified information contradicts the whistleblower, Fox and Friends. But why are people surprised? The partisan whistleblower was very wrong on what was said on my perfect no-pressure call with the Ukrainian president. Bring in another whistleblower from the bench. I'm actually realizing that Trump's pathological lying and constant use of projection makes it easier to figure out the truth from what he tweets. When Trump says it was a perfect no-pressure call with the Ukrainian president, that means the opposite. It was a call specifically to pressure Ukraine, which is exactly what the whistleblower claims. And by the way, Trump got this from Fox and Friends. Understand that what Donald Trump has at his fingertips are the most up-to-date analyses and data from 17 or more agencies, from intelligence professionals. And instead, Trump is gathering information and building his point of view from Steve Doocy and Brian Kilmeade on Fox and Friends. If we don't fix this, we deserve what we get as a result. And I don't say that in any kind of threatening or demeaning manner. It's if people aren't paying attention or are so skewed in how they interpret what is taking place, that this doesn't raise the alarm to a degree that we can remove this guy in November of 2020, then in a sense, we deserve what we get, because it's pathetic and it would be a huge embarrassment, which, by the way, the embarrassing element, I'm going to deal with later this week in audience questions. Let me know your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at @DPacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Big thanks today to two new members of the day, Christine Breen and Warren Swain. Really appreciate the support of both of you. Also want to say thanks to Ryan Korniloff. Ryan has been a member for almost 5 years and is today's longtime sustainer of the day. Join these great people. This is the #1 funding source of the show. Last week, I opened up the books and showed you what categories represent different portions of our revenue. As you saw, at 40%, memberships are the largest share of our revenue. You can sign up in under a minute at joinpakman.com. It's really, think about it like a tip, right? If you like the work that we're doing, if you want to support what we're doing, leave us a tip by signing up for membership at www.joinpakman.com. All right, so I did have emergency appendix removal late last week, very early in the morning, but late last week. And it was not fun. And big thank you to Pat for filling in for me and for handling the bonus shows and getting the shows out and even doing a few stories on the Friday show. He did a really great job and rolling with the punches. The whole team did, in fact. And incredibly, at the Wednesday show I did, suffering from appendicitis without even knowing it. And I had woken up at 2, 3 in the morning with just like high stomach pain every couple of hours during the night. And when I woke up in the morning, it got worse and it started moving down and to the right, which is pretty typical of appendicitis, but it could have been a number of other things. I did the show and then I decided to go to urgent care. And at urgent care, they didn't really do much. They just like pushed on my stomach and said, if it was appendicitis, it would hurt more. You should just go home and rest, which I did. And by the time that a few hours had gone by, things just did not feel right. So I went to the emergency room at Brigham and Women's Faulkner Hospital with my girlfriend, got there, they did some tests, and it was, after doing a CAT scan, it was very clearly appendicitis. And before I knew it, they had a surgical resident talking to me and saying, you should really remove it. We could try antibiotics, but it's not, it's slower. It could happen again. You really should have your appendix removed. And by this time, it must have been close to midnight. Absolute chaos at the emergency room. And Faulkner Hospital, it was actually great. The experience of something that was terrible was made a lot less bad by the great care that I received. But just to give you a sense of just how crazy it was, the number of people that were needing to be restrained by security. And I mean, here's just an example of what was going on just right next door to where I was in the emergency room. Yeah. And it just went on and on with people saying they didn't want to be held there against their will and, just absolute and total chaos. Listen. Yeah. So anyway, that was what was going on while the surgical resident was trying to explain the procedure to me. And at one point, I think she said, the anesthesiologist is going to come talk to you soon. And I think I vaguely remember saying, that's not the anesthesiologist, is it? And it was a lighthearted moment in the middle of what was otherwise not a fun day. So things, I mean, it was like all night. Eventually, the anesthesiologist showed up. We talked about the plan. I met the surgeon. And here's an interesting story, by the way, about the surgeon. The surgeon comes in, and I find out that the surgeon's specialty, Dr. Matt Nays, who did a great job, he specializes in endocrine surgery. And I'm thinking back, not that long ago, I read the Checklist Manifesto by Dr. Atul Gawande, who's a great doctor here in Boston, who also specializes in, I believe it's endocrine cancer surgery. So I said to my doctor, "Do you know Atul Gawande?" And he said, "Yeah, we share an office, actually." And one of the last things I remember when I was sedated already with very strong Valium, which is great, great, great stuff. If you're anxious, I have high medical anxiety. This stuff works. I remember being in the OR and everybody going through in a way that was reminiscent of what Atul Gawande sort of developed and writes about in the Checklist Manifesto, going through what is each person on the OR teams, what is the role of each person in the room, who is the patient, what are they doing? I remember actually saying, the last thing I remember is, it seems like everybody's read the Checklist Manifesto. And I remember people in the room laughing and then waking up in the recovery room. And it was like an hour procedure. It went as well as these things, I think, can go every day. I've been getting stronger, still not back to full strength, but it was not a fun experience. I think 7% of the population ends up having their appendix removed, from what I was told. And I don't wish it on anybody, but I'm glad that it was done. And so far, so good. A lot of people tweeting me saying, "What am I going to end up paying?" I don't know the answer to that. As many of you know, I pay $420 a month for my health insurance, which is okay. And many of you know about my $800 podiatry visit a few months ago. I've looked up that the procedure I had, not including like the emergency room component, just the procedure, can range in the U.S. from $1,500 to $180,000. Now, I'm guessing that there are other factors that affect that price other than just where you have it done. The average cost of an appendectomy is $33,000. So far, all I've gotten is the CAT scan bill, which was billed at $368. My insurance has graciously negotiated that down to $302, but they pay none of it because I have not yet reached my annual deductible of $2,000. So my approach is I'm sort of preparing for being told I have to pay my full deductible, that I'm going to owe $2,000 for this. It could be more, it could be less. We will see. But glad to be back, and hopefully just up and up from here, but not a fun couple of days. And thanks to everybody who wrote in and said, get well soon, well wishes, and all of that stuff. It really was great hearing from people, and we've got some voicemails coming up later related to this as well. It is endlessly fascinating what is going on with Mike Pence over the last 10 days or so. We learned from the Washington Post that it wasn't merely Mike Pompeo, Trump's Secretary of State, who was on that now infamous phone call between Donald Trump and the Ukrainian president. Vice President Mike Pence was also on the call, putting him fully into the fray. And right away, per NBC News, Vice President Mike Pence received a letter from House Democrats on Friday demanding that he turn over documents related to the president's dealings with Ukraine. Mother, as he refers to her, is not going to like this one bit. That we can be sure of. Now, before we dig into what we know, there are two views on this. One view is Pence is genuinely as much a part of the rampant criminality as is Trump. He's complicit, he's involved, he's a major player. That's view number one. The other view is, well, Pence is sort of involved, but really it's Trump who's going to make sure to take Pence down with him if he goes down, simply because that's the kind of person that Donald Trump is. And one reason that one might start to think that maybe Trump is going to make sure to take Pence down is that he actually said at that September 25 press conference at the UN, he said Mike Pence's conversations with Ukraine, out of the blue, he said, should also be looked into. You can look at those, they're perfect, but of course, no one was talking about them.
They're getting hit hard on this witch hunt. because when they look at the information, it's a joke. Impeachment for that? I think you should ask for VP Pence's conversation, because he had a couple of conversations also. I could save you a lot of time. They're all perfect. And when you see little Adam Schiff go out and lie and stand at the mic, smart guy, by the way.
So the question is this another unforced error by Donald Trump, or is Donald Trump slowly but surely starting to pull Mike Pence into this thing deliberately? And then when you look at it, Trump is actually right. Mike Pence is in way over his head on this entire thing. It's becoming the four treasons, for lack of a better term. Trump, Pence, Pompeo, and we'll see who gets that fourth spot in the band before we know it, I'm sure. Pence's team is saying, oh, yeah, well, Pence was strongly pressing the Ukrainians to investigate corruption, but he had no idea that it was because Trump wanted Biden smeared. It's already getting weird when you start to see spokespeople for the president and vice president starting to have implicitly conflicting points of view, if not direct conflict at this point in time. And in the end, we get to this question. Are we better off with Pence, or are we worse off with Pence? Could Pence be removed along with Donald Trump? But there's really only one answer. Impeachment won't remove either of them. It will be up to us in November of 2020. More and more people are angry with me, saying, David, don't write off removing Trump. Senators might vote to remove him. I'm not writing it off, but I'm writing it off as a strategy to win, because it's both unlikely and it's out of our control. You can come up with all sorts of scenarios once you pull Pence in. We'll impeach Trump, but not Pence. Allow Pence to resign so that a new VP can be confirmed before Trump's removal, who then becomes president of the United States. You can go through all of these scenarios. The two most likely realities are Pence is almost as big a player here as is Donald Trump, and neither is going to be removed by impeachment. It's not impossible, but it's unlikely to happen, and it's not something we can strategize around. So it is up to us to vote in November of 2020 and make sure that these people are removed. If you disagree with me on the strategy, let me know. I understand people who are saying I shouldn't already have as a foregone conclusion that nothing will go anywhere with impeachment. Okay. As a strategy, the focus needs to be voting them out and using any information that we can to expose the corrupt and ridiculous nature of what they've done in order to get more people interested in voting in November of 2020. I'm on Instagram at david.pacman. The show is on Instagram at David Pacman Show. Quick break, back after this.
The David Pacman Show at davidpacman.com. Welcome back to the David Pacman Show.
It's great to welcome to the program today Grace Blakely, who is an economics commentator at the New Statesman and also author of Stolen, How to Save the World from Financialization. Maybe that's a good place to start, Grace. When we say financialization, what are we talking about?
Sure. Well, I mean, the technical definition is the increasing role of financial markets, motives, actors and institutions in the operation of the domestic and international economy. Basically, what that means is bigger banks, bigger other financial institutions, hedge funds, private equity, etc., playing a much more significant role in how the economy works as a whole. So it's not just, banking and finance being a bigger part of the economy. It's actually how the growth of those industries changes the way the rest of the economy works. So you have, for example, the financialization of household finances, the financialization of firms and of corporate governance. And that really starts to shift how the entire economy works, rather than just kind of being represented by the rise of big banks.
And what's the effect of that on the average consumer, in the sense that, I mean, we can imagine in a very general sense, if there are transactions that historically were less frequently connected to the financial industry and over time become more connected, and this could be anything from, as you say, household finance to auto loans to day-to-day transactions using services like Square and Stripe or whatever the case may be. I mean, what is the impact on the consumer of this?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, in the book, I look at the financialization of firms, of households, and of the state in separate chapters. And the reason it's important to start with firms is that as we've had the kind of financialization of corporate culture, you've started to see a shift in how corporations work. And basically, as a result of the rise of shareholder value ideology, which is this idea that the only responsibility corporations have is to maximize value for shareholders, you started to see those firms kind of extract more out of the economy, pay workers less, and distribute more to shareholders, creditors, the wealthy, etc. And that's kind of created a set of quite big problems in the economy. So it's reduced businesses' investment in kind of building stuff, so in production and investment in things like factories, etc. And it's also reduced wages. So you've seen, in the US, the average worker, has the same purchasing power as they did in 1978. In the UK, we've had a decade of wage stagnation, and that's been a trend that goes back to the 80s, really, when this started stepping up. So you've seen a kind of long-term decline in the share of national income, share of GDP going to workers. But what we've also seen as a result of the growth of the finance sector is that that's kind of been concealed by ever increasing levels of debt, private debt, so credit card debt, mortgage lending, etc., and by rising asset prices, particularly house prices. So before the financial crisis, your wages might have gone down because of financialization of the corporation, but you might not have noticed because your house was rising in value and you're able to access quite cheap and plentiful credit, which allowed you to sustain a higher standard of living even in that context. So that's kind of a big way in which that's affected households. Now, of course, long term, rising levels of debt have not been sustainable, neither of rising asset prices. So that was really kind of integral in how the financial crisis played out in the US and the UK.
Yeah, this has such far-reaching tendrils in a sense to really understand this, because we understand what's going on with wages, as you point out. We understand what's going on with inequality, as you point out. But yet you still hear in the United States anyway, it's particularly commentators on the political right who say, to quote Bill O'Reilly some years ago, the poor still have big screen TVs and cellular phones. And part of that is actually part of the problem that you're pointing out, which is that's not an indicator that things aren't as bad. It's actually part of the indicator that things really are quite bad.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, what you saw really in the 90s and early noughties was accompanied by this massive expansion in credit. So mainly mortgage lending, but also lending, unsecured lending, to credit card lending, and lending to purchase particular goods. It happened at the same time as you had this kind of new wave of globalization, lots of outsourcing, lots of cheap consumer goods available, and this kind of really big consumer boom. And what that did is it not only changed the way the economy works, so obviously you had more people taking out more credit to buy, cheaper goods that allowed them to kind of have a higher standard of living, even in the absence of large increases in their wages. It also kind of changed like the way societies worked, right? So this is partly to do with the fact that taking out lots of debt really changes your kind of psychology as a worker, right? Because, if you're not getting paid very much, back in the day, you might have joined a union and said, we're going to fight for wage increases. If you've got loads of debt, and that's the main problem that's kind of preventing you from having a good standard of living, there's not really a lot you can do about that. It's a very individualized problem. It's not, it's something that's quite difficult to kind of push back against. It creates also a kind of pervasive sense of insecurity, right? Because if you've got a lot of debt and you're constantly on the verge of not being able to pay that, you're much less likely to do something like strike or try and change your job, or really kind of be able to resist the logic of the system in any really substantive way. So yes, that has been a problem for the economy because people are taking out too much debt, often very high interest rates, which is limiting their spending power, and which will become a really big problem when the economy turns, which in the US it likely will in the next couple of years. But it's also created a particular set of political and social problems as well.
Yeah, we've talked before about how the system, in a sense, is designed to prevent people from having the wherewithal, resources, and time to go and really do the type of protesting that would change the system. Because if you don't have sick time, or if you can't afford to take a day off, or if you can't afford to travel to where the protests are, that is the system itself preventing you from changing the system. And in a way, the companies that make money off of making credit available are also providing a means to artificially inflate one's standard of living such that they might be less inclined to go and protest because they're like, hey, I still have stuff in the end.
Exactly. And this whole model, in the book, I talk about privatized Keynesianism. So, the Keynesian settlement was when the state would step up and say, when the economy turned, it would increase government spending. It would provide, basic necessities that you need to live, that you could draw on if you didn't have a job. But since the 80s, we've seen that kind of system of state support replaced with basically, okay, if you can't afford something, take out debt. Whether, in the US, it could be medical debt, it could be student loans, it could just be, debt used to go on holiday or whatever. So you've really seen a kind of individualization of economic relationships whereby, it's on you as the individual to manage your debt, manage your assets, make sure that you are saving enough for retirement, that you're, insured, that, you've got enough to pay for your education, etc., rather than those, the burden of paying for that being kind of shared equally amongst everyone. And yeah, I mean, as you say, the more individualized the economy is, the harder it is for people to kind of engage in collective action and actually see, we're the majority here. People who live off work far outnumber people who live off wealth. And actually, if they pushed back against the system, then there would be real change. And that's obviously why in the US, there's such concern about, the rise of socialism, right? People are now starting to push back against this really kind of, terrible free market ideology that's caused so many problems. But it's taken a while, and it's still taking a while for people to actually realize, we have the power to change this stuff.
So in the US, even among people who believe that the degree of inequality is a problem, there is not wholesale agreement about how it should be fixed. There's progressive income taxation, for example, but we know that that doesn't include people whose income ends up coming disproportionately from capital gains, for example. There is discussion of inheritance taxes. Now in the Democratic primary, there's the discussion of different types of wealth taxes. Elizabeth Warren has proposed one. Bernie Sanders has talked about one. Do you have strong feelings about the policy proposals that you think would not just most effectively, but in the sort of systemically most healthy manner, reduce income inequality and wealth inequality?
Yes, absolutely. So the wealth taxes idea is a good one. It's something we're looking at in the UK as well. It is really important because that division that I spoke about between people who live off work and people who live off wealth is starting to become much starker. So rather than just looking at income inequality, which, as you say, doesn't necessarily take into account the ownership of assets, if you look at wealth inequality, I mean, in the UK, wealth inequality is doubly as high as income inequality. And you have similar, if anything, it's more extreme in the US. So wealth taxes are a really important part of this. And that can come in the form of, taxes on financial wealth, so on ownership of, on capital gains, as you said, on dividends, but also, property, people who own multiple homes or landlords, etc. Taxes on those assets are really important. But in the UK, we're also looking at a kind of much wider set of reforms to ownership itself. And we've got, for example, the idea of an inclusive ownership fund with the Labour Party in the UK, which is the idea that workers would be given a kind of steadily larger portion of shares in the companies that they work for, up to about 10% of the value of the entire company, which would allow workers to kind of both own the companies, a part of the companies that they work in, and also engage in the governance of those firms. We're also looking at increased state provision of things like housing, so social housing, and of actively nationalising some entities, like, for example, rail, utilities, etc. And what that would do is that rather than kind of waiting for those who own all the stuff to get very, very rich and then taxing it, if we all kind of collectively, socially own resources together, say if they're nationalised or if, it's a worker cooperative, then when the economy grows, everyone automatically gets better off. And this kind of both helps to reduce inequality, but also it helps to kind of democratize the economy. You're really trying to extend the principles of political democracy into the realm of the economy by saying workers should be playing a much more significant role in kind of owning and running the firms that they work in, because they know what's going on the ground. And, firms that do this sort of stuff often end up being much more productive.
So to bring this around a little bit to the current situation and what some believe is sort of a quickly approaching global recession of some degree, is there anything right now that reminds you of the phase right before the 2007-2008 crash? One of the things that does not seem similar is that at least I've not identified a particular market bubble that may be about to collapse, but I'm completely willing to have my mind changed as far as that goes. But what are the indicators you're looking at, and what's your general sense?
Yeah, so I mean, we are definitely within the next couple of years heading into a coordinated global recession, because the US is likely to go into recession within a couple of years. The UK probably before. A lot of it will depend upon Brexit. And Europe is already teetering on the brink of a recession as we speak. And part of that has to do with just the dynamics of the business cycle. So we get a recession, we get a kind of downturn in growth every 10 to 15 years. And, it's since the financial crisis, we haven't had another recession. And so we're kind of due one today. So there's that. There's also the issue, lots of issues around kind of financial stability and kind of issues around the financial system. So if you look at China, for example, there is kind of a big debt bubble there. And that's potentially causing could potentially cause some instability in the coming years, especially as growth slows in that economy. If you look at the housing markets in Australia, Canada, a couple of other parts of the world, you're actually seeing similar dynamics there as you did before 2007 in terms of rising mortgage lending, the securitization of that debt, and that being sold internationally. So there are kind of pockets of concern. There's also corporate debt in the US, very, very, very high and quite unstable. And there are kind of, sets of problems around the stability of the financial system with issues that haven't been resolved really since the financial crisis. So what we're really likely to see over the next couple of years is a coordinated global downturn in growth, but that may link in with some of these other problems of financial instability to create particularly bad crises in certain parts of the world. Particularly, China, the US to some extent, depending on what happens to this corporate debt bubble, and also Australia, Canada, places that haven't yet had their housing bubble.
What, if anything, can be done to mitigate the seriousness of it? Or is it really that nothing can be done and it has to be ridden out?
The problem that we have today really is that we have already, monetary policy, so interest rates are already about as low as they can go in most parts of the world. In the US, they've risen a little bit, and that's at least partly why you're starting to see some of these problems emerge, because it's made the debt that a lot of these corporations have more expensive. There is scope to reduce interest rates in the US, but in many other parts of the world, monetary policy is about as loose as it can be. So it'll be much more difficult to kind of alleviate the impact of this recession when it does come around. And that's also the case because we've had obviously this program of quantitative easing, which has been an attempt to loosen monetary policy even more, even when interest rates were effectively at zero in many places. And that hasn't been wound up. The US started to wind that up, and it's causing some real instability in financial markets in the US. So it looks as though we'll be going into another recession with big central bank balance sheets, so central banks owning a lot of assets still through the QE program, and relatively low interest rates, which doesn't give you a lot of leeway to be able to cut interest rates or potentially do even another round of QE, right? I think there's also this other issue of after the last recession, governments stepped back from using fiscal policy to expand the economy, so spending and taxes, because government debt was relatively high. Now government debt is still relatively high, at least partly because we haven't seen that much economic growth in many parts of the world over the last kind of decade or so. So really on a lot of metrics, governments are going to be really constrained going into the next recession. And we might start to see some unconventional things being done by government. So a lot of people are talking about helicopter money. This is the idea that you can kind of create money to give to households to boost spending. Something that I write about in the book is the idea of a debt write-off. So writing off some of this debt that's constraining people's incomes in the US and the UK and other parts of the world.
Absolutely fascinating and not particularly optimistic, but that is the reality. We've been speaking with Grace Blakely, who's an economics commentator at The New Statesman. You can check out the book Stolen: How to Save the World from Financialization. Grace, I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So much has happened over the last few days, and one of those things is that a plant from a totally whacked out extremist group called LaRouche PAC asked a crazy question at an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez town hall, and the whole point of it was to make people who believe in climate change look crazy. And the reactions from the right have been incredibly laughable, but also almost concerning in how pathological they are. Let me explain it all to you. LaRouche PAC has been around a long time. It's associated with a guy named Lyndon LaRouche, who died about 8 months ago. It's a wacky group. You can research it. You'll very quickly figure out how crazy the group is. They are now a pro-Trump group that is skeptical of climate change. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had a town hall in Queens, New York City. So they thought, let's send someone there. Let's have them act crazy, and will make people who believe in climate change look really, really bad. So they send in a woman wearing a T-shirt that says, "Save the planet, eat the children," to get up and to ask a question and to say, hey, we need to really save the planet. We need to start eating babies. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez reacts the way a normal person would react when you see someone that could be completely unstable. You can't tell. And what you do is you don't react much at all in order to avoid further escalating them. Take a look at what went down, including the question and AOC's reaction.
Because of the climate crisis, we only have a few months left. I love that you support the Green Deal, but it's not getting rid of fossil fuel. It's not going to solve the problem fast enough. A Swedish professor saying, we can eat dead people, but that's not fast enough. So I think your next campaign slogan has to be this: we got to start eating babies. We don't have enough time. There's too much CO2. All of you, you're a pollutant. Too much CO2. We have to start now, please. You are so great. I'm so happy that you're really supporting the Green Deal, but it's not enough. Even if we would bomb Russia, we still have too many people, too much pollution. So we have to get rid of the babies. That's a big problem. Just stopping having babies is not enough. We need to eat the babies, and this is very serious. Please give a response.
Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you. We'll go ahead.
Okay.
No, we'll go ahead. It's so no. Yeah, no. Thank you. So I think So one of the things that's very important to us is that we need to treat the climate crisis with the urgency that it does present.
So as the woman was eventually, I believe, escorted out because people in the room could tell something is clearly wrong with this person and her presence is making everyone uncomfortable, AOC starts giving some general answer about climate change. And there are Trumpists and right-wingers who have the nerve to say, why didn't AOC denounce baby eating? Why didn't AOC say, no, we shouldn't eat babies and children? Are you people this stupid? I mean, seriously, criticize AOC for policy, criticize her because you think she's wrong about this or that political position, criticize her for something that makes sense. But she didn't properly denounce baby eating and answered it as if it were a normal question. This person was, now we know it was a plant, but from the second she starts talking, it's either a plant or someone who is so mentally ill that you don't want to do anything that could even possibly agitate them. And AOC did exactly the right thing. When people approach me on the subway or wherever and something is very clearly wrong with them, or they are furious and it just doesn't make any sense, and you can't tell, is this person dangerous? Is this person mentally ill? I can't tell. And they spout some government conspiracy theory. Do you think I respond to them about the specifics of the conspiracy that they are touting? No. you do what you can to de-escalate. And initially it was believed that this was merely a mentally ill person. It was later found out that it was someone from LaRouche PAC. They might also be mentally ill. They've been doing this eat the children thing elsewhere. There is a picture, there's actually a number of pictures of people wearing the exact same t-shirts canvassing out on the streets. So AOC did the right thing. She handled it correctly. Stop being losers and go complain about something else. I mean, seriously. And, you know, I don't know, sometimes this is concern trolling, where the right-wingers and the Trumpists who are saying, oh my goodness, AOC didn't even have the decency to denounce baby eating. Sometimes they're not being genuine. It's concern trolling. They're pretending to be worried. Could AOC maybe actually be in favor of baby eating? Or does AOC maybe really think that baby eating is a way to save the planet or whatever? I actually think that there are some Trumpists that are so deluded and so malignantly disconnected from the realities of how to deal with people in the real world that they're not concern trolling when they say, why didn't AOC denounce the baby eating? They are actually so disconnected from reality that they just see evil, they see wrongdoing, they see misdeeds in everything that something like somebody like AOC does. And that's why you can't convince those people to change their mind and vote the right way in November of 2020. That is why we have to go around them or through them, not with them, to defeat Donald Trump in November of 2020. It's sad, but it's the reality. Okay, so listen, were this next story not something that I already suspected, I wouldn't even be bringing it up. But as many of you know, I have long suspected that Donald Trump, from my completely amateur, unsophisticated point of view, sometimes seems to be on uppers and sometimes seems to be clearly coming down from uppers. There are pictures now which appear to show boxes and boxes of Sudafed, an upper, at Donald Trump's desk. We're going to get to all of the details. There is the upper Trump I've mentioned before. That's the one that is speaking quickly, sweating often, sniffing a lot. And then there's the other Trump, the slow, slurring, God bless the United States of America, the depressed looking and sounding Trump. And it's all very weird. And this goes back to that bizarre tweet that Donald Trump sent during his 2016 campaign, where he proclaimed that he loves Hispanics while eating a taco bowl from the Trump Tower Grill. Remember this tweet and picture? Happy Cinco de Mayo. The best taco bowls are made in Trump Tower Grill. I love Hispanics. And the really fascinating thing here is not actually Trump's taco bowl, but it's what's in the drawer just to Donald Trump's left and behind him, over his left shoulder, sort of. There's an open drawer, which Twitter user Jay Railing points out, is filled with boxes of Sudafed. Quote, in 2016, Trump posted a photo of himself that gave away more than he intended. An open desk drawer revealed box after box of Sudafed piled on top of one another. And when you look closely at that picture, you do see what look like at least 4 boxes of Sudafed. Now, Jay Railing makes a few other claims in his tweet thread. I've tried to research them, and they are even more interesting. The first one, for example, is that although the photo was taken in New York, the boxes include a type that is only sold in the UK with a different box and distinctive ingredients not found in the US. I went on CVS.com, and indeed, that version of Sudafed is not sold in the United States currently. They sell others, but not that one. Same thing at Walgreens. So it seems that at least currently, this Sudafed is not even available in the United States. Now, as we know, Trump often seems overly alert and has notably dilated pupils, 2 symptoms of taking exactly this. Now, the thing is, this is not a new allegation. Noel Casler is a New York City comedian who worked on Trump's show, The Apprentice, and has said many times Trump was snorting Adderall and eating Sudafed. Quote, Trump snorted Adderall all through the day on Apprentice. He also ate UK Sudafed like candy. But at night and at parties, he switched to cocaine and high-end methamphetamine that was hand-delivered by bikers. The point is, he was always high. That hasn't changed. And of course, if you go back to the video of Trump's debates with Hillary Clinton, there was that constant sniffing that also raised questions about Trump's drug use. Remember this? So that's difficult to listen to. I apologize. I'm just being thorough here. And again, often extremely dilated pupils that just don't seem to make sense for the amount of light that is in the room where the pictures are often taken. So am I saying this to make fun of Trump? No. He may well have a problem, but it is to point out that upper Trump and downer Trump have been visibly very different from the beginning. And I can only imagine that if someone has access to nuclear weapons and is involved in diplomatic conversations with world leaders at the highest level, this is not what you want. You don't want upper and downer version of the world leader that can launch nuclear weapons, make or break alliances and relationships, slap tariffs that destroy, hundreds of thousands of workers' businesses. This is not a guy. That's not a position, rather, where you want a guy that has an upper version and a downer version. I want to hear from you about this. What do you make of this? When I've brought up the Trump upper downer stuff in the past, I get substance abuse professionals who email me and they say, David, don't use my name. It would not be appropriate for my name to be publicly attached to this, but I've been noticing the exact same thing as you. And I think you're exactly spot on. Let me know what you think about this, the pictures, the sniffing, the dilated pupils, the entire thing. I do want to hear from you about it. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Received a number of voicemails and emails related to my appendicitis. It was great to hear from the Eggman. Take a listen to this.
Hi, I'm just calling to see if Dave is feeling better. I'm worried about him. I'm hoping you're out of the hospital soon and hoping you recover quickly. Shalom, brother.
Shalom, Eggman. Yes, I was out of the hospital within a couple of hours of the procedure. I am feeling significantly better, not 100%. I'm told it can take even sometimes up to 2 weeks to be back to 100%, but working on it every day. I also got some people believed, they thought, there are people now who think that the Bernie Sanders thing is a distraction and that the producer Pat thing is a distraction. Take a listen to this.
David, this is Ralphie from Tallahassee. Just going to leave you a message. My concern is this appendicitis thing. Is it just a distraction?
Yeah, you're spot on. It's absolutely 110% merely a distraction. No, but in all seriousness, thanks to everybody who reached out on Twitter, email, Instagram, Facebook. I heard from a ton of people, and I really do appreciate it. And as part of my recovery, I am not doing the bonus show today. So producer Pat is going to have a fantastic bonus show for you today. 2 ways to access it: become a member at joinpacman.com or a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.